So everyone, thank you so much for staying with us. And for those of you who are joining right now, thank you so much for joining and for spending your weekend with us. This is presented by our very amazing two organizations, basically, and we will be sending their link and dropping their link on the chat box very soon. You can also watch all our festivals at watch.bushwickfilmfestival.com. Go and check it out. We have 100 independent films over there, and from 30 different countries, which is quite impressive. With that note, we have our next panelists on board. Sorry, we are running a bit late, but I am so excited to introduce them because I am extremely excited to talk about this topic. It's a deep dive into the book to screen. And now we have Elisa Doria Smith and Hardy Justice. Virtual round of applause. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I am well. Thank you so much. Again, this is the new normal, right?
Yes.
We're in a virtual space. It's definitely weird and interesting, and we're all learning so much and putting up a conference in a virtual space. Thank you so much for your time, both of you. I'm extremely grateful to have you both on here. For people who may not know, please do check out our events page so you can actually learn more about our amazing speakers, because one or two words and a line will not do justice to their accomplishments. They have done such amazing work. I would actually like to start with Elisa, if you don't mind. So as a manager of literary arts at Lionsgate, would you be able to tell our amazing viewers what are some of the things that actually falls under your umbrella?
Of course. Yeah. So that's my title. But what I do is called book scouting, or book to film scouting. So essentially trying to find books before they're published, before anyone else has a chance to buy them, and get a competitive advantage and in the marketplace, which, as you guys I'm sure know, is hot. Most books are optioned well before they're published now. I'm sure you guys some of you wondering how that happens, and it's book scouts. There's someone like me at pretty much every studio, TV production company, independent producer, everywhere. So yeah, it involves lots of reading, obviously, lots of publishing industry connections, trying to seek out the next hot author, the next genre trend, and working across all areas, really.
That is brilliant, because it's one of my favorite topics as well, because of course, as you said, it's pretty hot topic. Like every now and then we see so many adapted materials these days. So moving on to Hardy. Yay. So for those of you who don't know, Hardy is also a brilliant professor. He teaches filmmaking as well, and of course a seasoned producer. Very glad to have you, Hardy, on here.
Good to be here.
Like Hardy, as a producer, because both of you have amazing experiences and like a cornucopia of knowledge in this sector, in adaptation and things like that. From a producer's hat or producer's point of view, how would you say the scouting, the optioning, and the roles are different, or how do you take that basically? Like, for example, Julie, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Social Network, About a Boy, the Academy Award nominated screenplay. So like how is it different as a producer, basically, from the entire topic?
I think they're not sort of radically different. I think in a lot of ways, being a good producer is trying to find good material. And, like as a producer, you're not like a writer or a director where you have this skill set that can be applied to, to something that you maybe self-generate. But, for a producer, you've got to find good material. And so I think, having the ability to sort of search out book material is a great source. If you look at, just like the past couple of years of all the Academy Award winning films or nominated films, I would say, probably, I think a couple of years ago, I think every single one of them was an adaptation of some kind. It was an adaptation of a book, it was an adaptation, Little Women last year, it was an adaptation of a book. They're adaptations of comic books. So I'd say it's a vital source for finding good material. And I think the division between sort of literary scout and producer is kind of a fuzzy one. I think a lot of times people can start out as kind of literary scouts focusing specifically on finding books, and then transition over time to kind of carry that project forward. So I know during when I was first working, one of the first couple of projects that I got going were books that I'd found, and then that allowed me to kind of grow with them over time. So I think it's a key skill to have, and it's just it's something that I think any producer needs to know how to do, or at least have access to somebody who is well versed in it. It can kind of kind of navigate that world for you and help you find good material.
That's wonderful. So Harvey, as an SVP of Illuminated Content, I believe there was the recent film that also came out, which was based on a publication, if I'm not mistaken. So how would that be different than a book, or is the process the same?
Well, I'm trying to think of which projects you might be referring to, because we did a movie last year, which sadly was coming out just as COVID broke. And so I think they ended up not ever putting it into a theater. And that was based on a book. And I'm trying to think of what other projects we've had that have been based on source material. We've got
I think I'm referring to the Human Capital.
Oh yeah, so Human Capital, that was, that's a interesting project, because that started out as a novel by Stephen Addion, and then it was made into an Italian movie, which I think won the Donatello Award, which is sort of like their version of Oscars. And oddly enough, I sort of saw the movie at a film festival and thought, oh, maybe this could be an adaptation. And then went back and realized, oh, it was a book. And so it was sort of had this kind of weird circuitous route. But I think that's, sort of speaks to the value of books, is that they can be adapted for lots of different cultures and settings. You can change the time period, sometimes change, the characters themselves pretty radically to be Italian versus American. And so, so in that case, when we were doing the adaptation, we went back to looked at the book. We also looked at elements of the Italian film, and then, worked with the filmmaker, Mark Myers, who also did another adaptation of a graphic novel called My Friend Dahmer, which he made into a movie a few years ago, starring Alex Wolff. So I think, in that case, it was more about getting the cultural elements right, because it was a lot about it was a sort of suspense novel set in the world of, two different families. An accident happens and you're sort of wondering who's going to take the blame for this accident. And it had a lot to do with class and social position. So the Italian version did a very Italian version of those things. And, I think our job was to try and figure out the American versions of things, which were also in the book, but it was also a book from a few years ago. So it had to be updated, for more current context. And so I think, it was a really interesting experience, but I think really instructive in terms of how malleable book material is.
That's wonderful. That's a very good insight. Elisa, moving to you a little bit, I wanted to ask you, so what are some of the projects that you have headed or have scouted that have made it to the big screen that you're so proud of? I think one of the things that Lionsgate has amazing movies, especially like adaptations as well. Like one of the ones that I think as a viewer sticks out to me is Hunger Games. I think that's one of the probably the biggest franchise, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. What would be one of the ones that you are extremely like proud of that made it to the big screen and you're like, oh yes, I worked on that?
Well, I don't have to tell anyone it's been a weird year. And I've been working for Lionsgate for just shy of 3 years now. So the things I've brought in have not been made yet. There's a couple of things I love to plug that we've acquired and are actively making. Yeah. My proudest moment is for sure a book called Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams, which you guys may have seen on Instagram. And it's a British book, 25-year-old author. It's about a Black Jamaican British woman living in London. It's hilarious. It's heartbreaking. And our UK TV arm optioned that actually 3 years ago now already. And they're still working on that adaptation for television. So that can be sometimes how long these things, I mean, they can take much, much longer. They can be quicker. My previous position was with a boutique scouting firm where DreamWorks was a client. They're now called Amblin. They were DreamWorks at the time. And they optioned Girl on the Train while I was working there. And that got made very, very quickly. And of course, we were very proud of that score. Because at the time that they optioned it, it was not a bestseller, and they just saw the actual power of the book and how popular it was going to be and how cinematic it was. One more project we have at Lionsgate on the feature side is called The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang, which is a wonderful, sexy, hilarious rom-com. I encourage everyone to check out. It's about an autistic woman who's a professional, super successful in her career, not so successful in her love life, trying to find the right guy, and she hires an escort to help her get better at dating. So it's
love
awesome.
the premise already.
It's
Great
awesome.
pitch, Elisa.
Yeah, oh good. Yeah, so that and Queenie are my two upcoming projects. You know, as Hardy was saying, like the producers tend to take the story all the way to the finish line. As a scout, I'm really much more hands off at this point. You know, once I bring it in and make sure they know that it's excellent, they, my execs, hire the writer, director, cast it up, make it good. So yeah, I'm looking forward to those coming to fruition, and you guys should be too.
Yay! Of course, everyone. We're going to check those out. I actually wanted to take a little deep dive, as our title suggests as well, to basically get a wider and a deeper understanding. So let's say I read a book, right? And then I really like it. Then what happens? So like take us, both of you, if you could like take us, walk us through the entire thing. Like how does a book get scouted? How does it get optioned? The rights, the IP, and all those amazing things that are involved in this entire thing, until we get to see it on the big screen. So if you could like take us with that, and we'll start with Elisa and we'll move on to Hardy.
Sure. So really the scout is like the very beginning of the process. You know, it can be a book that's just going out to editors for consideration for publishing. That happens with increasing frequency. So usually I'm the first one to read it. The first one of almost anyone in the world, which is very cool. Besides for the editors and the agents, and so if I like it, if I think it's special, if I think it's cinematic, if I think it feels authentic, which is increasingly something I think many buyers are looking for. You know, if the voice is special, if it might appeal to this director we really want to work with. There's a million different reasons why I might flag this book. And then I bring it up the chain and I say, listen, this is amazing. It's hot. It's exactly what we're looking for. And then, someone else will read it at the company. Hopefully it makes its way up the chain. They make an offer on it through the agents. And then we get to work.
That's awesome. So that is like kind of when Hardy gets in too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think that's a pretty great summary of most of the steps. I think obviously the steps once you've acquired the rights or the option the material and are given the right to try and make an adaptation. The next step is you have to find a good writer or good writer director, and that's a whole nother process. And I think a lot of times as was mentioned, it can take a number of years to get a book right, and and part of it is that it just takes a really long time to find the right people to be involved. It can take a number of months, just sending out the book, getting people to read it, getting them to respond, having them come in and sort of pitch their version of how they see the adaptation going. But I think that's one of the more sort of for me more rewarding aspects of it, is because you get to really sort of figure out how to translate something that's really beautiful and, you know, well crafted already, or that has this spark that everybody is responding to, and then how to translate that to film. So obviously, once you've got a good script, then you have to find a good director, or sometimes you're working with the director during that process. Also, hopefully go out and attract cast. And then once you have those key pieces, then you start to know, like, oh, do we have a financially viable project that can get made? And, you know, whether you're doing it within the studio system, are they, you know, filmmakers and actors that they, you know, are interested in kind of making movies with, or if it's an independent space, is it the kind that, you know, you can go out and kind of find the financing with that package. So sometimes that development period can feel very much like you don't know, but then suddenly you get those pieces to fall in place and it moves much more quickly forward.
That's wonderful. That is a very, very good point. So one of the things I think, as an audience member and also a person in the media, I would like to know that, you know, sometimes when we read the book, we are an avid fan and an avid reader, and we're like, this is amazing. I would love to see this on screen. And then let's say the studio announces it and it makes it to its way to the screen. And once we see it, we're like, oh no, the book was better. So there's this dilemma, right, as an audience member, that as a producer, as a manager of the literary arts, you will be thinking that yes, we have a fan following, there will be a loyalty, we'll be bringing those people to the screen. So how difficult, or how do you keep that balance so that it actually translates as it was on the paper as well? It translates to the screen equally nicely as it was on the paper. We'll start with Hardy and we'll go to
Okay. Well, I think in terms of that translation, it's funny, you know, like I've worked on a lot of different book and other adaptation projects, and, you know, what I've discovered is, you know, that there's no right or wrong way, or maybe the, you know, like, I guess, you know, one thing I've discovered is that you can find somebody who will tell you one thing to keep in mind when doing an adaptation, and then you can find somebody equally brilliant to tell you the exact opposite. And I think, like, one of my favorites is that, you know, Ingmar Bergman, you know, obviously one of the master filmmakers of the 20th century, was very clear. He didn't think that you should ever do a literary adaptation. He thought, you know, a novel and a movie are two different things. They speak two different languages. One, if you try and translate one to the other, you're on a fool's errand. But then, you know, somebody like, you know, Stanley Kubrick, who was also a master of the 20th century, you know, had the exact opposite view. And his point of view was that novels are so much about the interior life of their characters. And, and for him, having that interior life so well understood gave him a real guiding principle in terms of how to adapt that character to screen. He didn't have to constantly be figuring that out, you know, from an external point of view. He already knew what that was, and there was just looking for ways to make it external. So, you know, I think, the same thing goes with like making changes or being faithful. It's funny, you know, like Netflix just recently came out with a new version of the movie Rebecca, which was, you know, famously made by Alfred Hitchcock. And, you know, I remember reading David O. Selznick's memos to Hitchcock during the making of the original Rebecca. And, you know, he got very upset at any changes that Hitchcock made to the book. And he, you know, there's these incredible emails where he's saying, like, you know, this is terrible. You don't know what you're doing. You know, all these discussions about, you know, there's flaws in the books that we have to fix. You know, don't fix them. You know, if you fix these things, you might be doing some, you know, sort of horrible thing to the underlying material. You know, people like these things maybe because they're contradictory and they don't make any sense. We can't fool with that. So he made Hitchcock go back and stay much closer to the book, whereas other people will say, like, you know, you got to find a bad novel that has a great plot, and then that gives you the freedom to make it good because you're not so tied to it. You know, so I think, you know, you kind of have to figure out each project, you know, take it on its own, you know, and at the end of the day, you know, the script that you have and the filmmaker that you have are going to have to be making something that's different. So if it's not working there, you can't, you know, you'll never succeed if you try and make it too close. having said that, I'm sure if I was working on Harry Potter, I would know that you have to stick to that book, that the fans will come after you. But I think there's just as many examples of people who made radical changes, and the movie was beautiful, and it was well received too. So that may be too long-winded an answer to your question, but
no, I think that was perfectly put, actually. And one of the things, one of the quotations by Stephen King that actually resembles so much to me is that he said that books and movies are like apples and oranges. I mean, they're both fruits, but they taste completely different. So I think that is also something that, as an audience member, I think we should keep in mind, because of course a book is like hundreds and thousands of pages, but when it eventually gets translated into the screen, until and unless it's a long saga of multiple episodes, sometimes it does get difficult to translate the entire thing, I think, right? So Elisa, while you were scouting, so let's say a material, right? What are some of the things that you have to follow? Like, do you have a rubric, or you're like, no, I like this, I'll go with this? Or sometimes you're like, no, I have to follow these rules.
Well, I cover a really wide range of divisions here. So we have a theatrical, movie division, of course, who released The Hunger Games and Twilight and Wonder. And, for them, the big question these days has been what's a theatrical movie versus what's a streaming movie, which is increasingly the lines are blurring. I mean, Martin Scorsese's making movies for streaming, like what, Sandra Bullock is starring in a Netflix, what now makes a movie worth a theatrical release and feel like an event. And those are increasingly our conversations. And it's harder to find a book these days that sort of like lines up with that and delivers everything you need for a theatrical release. So then the director and the tone of it and the exciting elements that can come together around it become more important. I also scout for TV. TV is totally different. TV, you're looking for, multiple characters, an interesting new world we haven't seen before. Lionsgate made Orange is the New Black many years ago. That was one of the flagship first, scripted series for Netflix. It's based on a memoir, and it certainly didn't follow that to the letter, but it found an interesting world that we hadn't quite seen before on screen, and many characters to explore. And so there's different. As I'm reading things, usually I get a feeling about where this might fit into what we're looking for. Maybe it's not. Maybe I just love it and it's not quite right for us, but it might be right for another company. Sometimes there are books that sort of defy all of this, right? Like, I think a good example is Little Fires Everywhere, which was a huge hit miniseries, of course. And that book was just so good and so readable and so sticky that even though it didn't quite fit into a typical genre, it's a little bit thriller, a little bit drama, it really resonated with so many people and got that buzz, and then it got Reese on board, and then it became like more of an event and people had to check it out. So sometimes when I'm reading something that's not like a no-brainer of a movie or a TV show, I can say, but is there something here that I haven't seen before that really stays with me?
That's wonderful. I think those are beautiful. And yes, one of the ones that is my personal favorite is a little indie movie called Love, Rosie. It's not that indie, but I was just trying to. But yes, I think that's a beautiful movie also by Lionsgate. It's really, I think it also portrays the essence of the book pretty well, and it really translates it into the screen. One of the things that I personally wanted to know is, so do you have the authors or the talent agents on your speed dial? Like, how do you scout that next hit or next movie, next TV show that you think that, yes, I think this would be the next one that the audience will love?
Yeah, well, I don't deal directly with the authors, generally speaking. It's mostly agents and publishing editors and other people who work in publishing. A scout is as a buyer, your best kept secret most of the time. And the way they do things is also their best kept secret quite frequently. So, it's really just connections that I've built up over many, many years, people that I trust and who trust me. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I actually also wanted to know that so Hardy, what would your both of you, but we'll start with Hardy. So Hardy, what would be your favorite project till date that you're extremely proud of and you learned something from it? Also, on the contrary, you thought that this didn't go as well as you thought. So basically, like things that you would have probably wanted to know before heading into the project. So like two things basically: one that you learned a lot from the project, and one thing that you probably wanted to know before you stepped into the project.
I don't know. I feel like I have kind of a version of both sides of that with kind of almost every project I feel like I've worked on. I think with, I worked when I was working at Scott Rudin's office, I worked on The Social Network, which, I think, made a beautiful movie. But when we first, optioned the material, it was based on a book by Ben Mesrick, which wasn't even written yet. So it was really just just like a 15-page proposal that sort of talked about the founding of Facebook and the key characters involved in the lawsuit and things. And, I remember thinking like, this is a big idea. This is a big cultural, moment to kind of understand, but it's also about people typing code onto a computer. So how are we going to do that? And that was really instructive, and I think obviously, Scott was able to get, Aaron Sorkin and David Fincher involved. And for me, just seeing how, such talented people were able to kind of take something that feels unfilmable, but, and make it into a movie, that, sort of made me feel like, that's what you really, you shouldn't be sort of, you were asking earlier about rules, that I think in some ways, if the idea feels compelling enough, if there's something about it that seems vital to us as a culture or to actors or directors, that there's often a way that, a way into that material. And so I feel like that project gave me, a couple of other projects in terms of things that I learned about. I worked on a project called American Honey, which was an Andrea Arnold movie that played at Cannes. I think it won the jury prize a few years ago. And that was based on a New York, I think a New York magazine, I mean, not New York magazine, but New York Times magazine article about, kids who were essentially runaways, but they were put into these groups of kids who would sort of travel around to different neighborhoods and sell magazine subscriptions. Oftentimes there were not real magazine subscriptions, but it was a way of just kind of, grifting people. And Andrea Arnold, made that movie by, just kind of finding kids who were in similar life circumstances. And she had a script, but it was only about 70 pages long. And so the other 30% she kind of found in the movie making process. And on another project I worked on, Bernie, which was also from a magazine article, Richard Linklater did the same thing where he had a script. It was 70 pages long. And I think part of the reason why we were able to make those movies with them independently was, the traditional studios were like, what do you mean you only have a 70-page script? You're going to find the other 30%. But that other 30% was, the process of finding that was really intriguing and instructive to me. I'm trying to think of like lessons on the negative side. I think there's a lot of those, when I was working at Tribeca Productions a number of years ago, we started working on the movie that eventually became Bohemian Rhapsody. And it's funny, I was working on two different kind of music themed projects then. We were also doing a movie about Keith Moon, the drummer of The Who. And we had kind of the same problem. They were both adaptations of real people's lives. And just the difficulty of getting approval from the people whose lives are going to be portrayed on screen can be very tricky in a lot of ways. So that there's this, and I think the same thing is often true with a book, where getting, like, especially if you're working closely with the original author or something like that, their point of view about it, and the filmmaker's point of view, or what's needed. It's a lot of translation in that way. And sometimes, like in the case with Bohemian Rhapsody, I left and it was many years later before it finally got made, before they got it figured out. So I think those kinds of practical considerations, I think were instructive to me as well, even though I'm not sure I know what to look out for, because how will you ever know? But I think it's it's sort of different in each case, if that's not too much of a wishy-washy answer.
No, I think that's brilliant. That's a really, really good point. One thing I also wanted to touch upon is coverage. So I know a lot of like writing a coverage is like integral to this entire process. Do you think it could be like a make or break deal of a good coverage sometimes as well? So for example, the person who's writing it, let's say the head of the department is not reading the entire material, right? So do you think that could also like play a bit of a role or a factor into whether that project is going to get the green light or not? We'll start with Lisa.
I actually do. I think, it's a good question, because I've come up against that actually many times. I like to write and pitch things up for myself that I really care about, because it really can make a difference and how the project is perceived. And you kind of really only have that one shot a lot of the time to get your idea out there. And the better pitcher you are, the easier that's going to be, and the better that process is going to be. And you have to really paint a picture. I think that's unfortunately sometimes true.
I would second that coverage does have a huge impact on how a project is perceived. I'd say from like a producer's point of view, I'm always trying to navigate like, oh, what's the studio's coverage look like? Am I going to go into a cold room because they're going to be looking at some coverage? But having said that, like there's been a lot of, especially book projects that I've found over the years, that the studio coverage, kind of downplayed it. But if it's really good, I found that you can kind of do an end run around that by, if it's really good, if it's a great character, or if it's just an amazing story, it can often be an actor or director magnet. And then suddenly you can go back to that studio, or go in the first time after you've done that legwork. And then suddenly it's not like, oh, this kind of beautifully written literary novel, but now it's a movie starring, Mahershala Ali, or whoever happens to be the actor of the moment that people want to work with in a lot of ways. And I've read my share of coverage, I've written my share of coverage over the years, and I think the most memorable coverage I remember reading this wasn't for a book, but it was a Charlie Kaufman script called Being John Malkovich, and I remember reading the studio coverage on it. Obviously it's a number of years ago, but the reader had said, maybe on the planet that Mr. Kaufman is from, this is considered, a workable story, but here on planet Earth, this. So it was like the coverage completely slammed it, but it, obviously such a well-regarded movie at the end of the day. Lots of other projects that I can, Shelter Island, which later became Martin Scorsese movie, had past coverage on it. So I think it's something you can work around, but you have to kind of work doubly hard. And I think Alyssa's right that if you can pitch it and get people to see it in the right way, they'll look past the coverage. It doesn't sort of put you dead in the water, but it's definitely something that can be an impediment or a hurdle that you have to get over.
I think that's wonderful. I did enjoy writing coverage in your class, Hardy. I thought that was a brilliant piece of work, because I think it's very crucial. And yes, of course. So everyone out there, the film enthusiasts and the filmmakers who's about to adapt the next amazing feature film or TV show, pitching is the key. So I actually wanted to ask you like a little fun question. So for example, what would your favorite character, whether either from the movie or from a book, what would your favorite character actually do in 2020 quarantine? What do you think? We'll start with you, Lisa.
I had some time to think about this, and honestly, my favorite character of all time has got to be Liz Lemon from 30 Rock. I know that's TV, not movies, but I'm gonna cheat a little bit and say Liz Lemon would be having the time of her life in quarantine. She'd be eating all the night cheese and just enjoying being alone.
So basically totally excelling, like
Oh yeah,
acing the
2020. Yeah.
Hashtag 2020. Marty, what's your favorite character in 2020 quarantine? What would they be doing?
Well, it's funny. This sort of came up the other day when I was talking about about something similar to this. I can't remember exactly how it came up, but I was just trying to think of movie characters or book characters and how they would react to the quarantine. And I feel like there's two reactions, and one was, I definitely wouldn't want to be stuck in a house with like Thomas Wake from To the Light, The Lighthouse, like go insane, social isolation, driven to insanity. But on the other end, one of my favorite, literary characters, and I guess movie characters as well, is, Winnie the Pooh. And it seems like he's kind of on the exact opposite end of that, kind of spectrum, like he just somehow, he's so, like, you could take a lot of mental health advice from Winnie the Pooh. Like he's so blissfully able just to kind of, do nothing. Do you know what I mean? And a lot of ways, that's, if we could all sort of take a lesson from that. So I imagine he would handle it pretty well. To the Lighthouse, or not To the Lighthouse, but the Lighthouse characters would probably, be in a similar situation that we've already seen on screen. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question.
I think those are great. I think those are amazing characters choices. I love them. I actually also would like to ask you for a suggestion for all our viewers who are watching, and then we'll move ahead. We have a few questions here. One of the things that I would like to ask is, what would your suggestion be to that film student or to that person who's watching this conference, hopefully now or later down the line, or the film enthusiast or that cinephile who's about to read a book or actually is going to decide to make their first adapted feature or TV show? What would your suggestion be basically for that individual? We'll start with Elisa.
I'm so sorry. Can you repeat? My 3-month-old is crying, and Grandma just came in.
I'm so sorry.
No. Could you just repeat the question? I heard that.
Sure. The question is basically, what would your suggestion be to the person who's about to adapt their next book or publication for their next feature?
For any content creators, I think just reading as much as you can, everything you can, is always a good rule of thumb. Read the things that are getting optioned if you can. Read, if you want to make a movie in the style of XYZ, read everything that they're working on, the writers that they're attracted to. Just having that background knowledge is going to help you. And also read, scripts that are, and then go back and read the source material. And that's always a good way to learn, how things get done, especially if it's something you loved and think was done right.
Hardy, what would your suggestion be to the next filmmaker who's about to adapt their feature or?
So somebody who already has a piece of material that they're interested in adapting, is that the basic starting point?
Yes.
Well, I think obviously finding something you're passionate about is going to be most important, because there's probably going to be a lot of hard work involved in that. And there's nothing worse than sort of getting sick of something and not knowing how to be able to kind of, get away from it. So I think that's one of the things that books offer, or other kinds of source material offer, is that hopefully it's something that you love, so you can keep going back to it. You can always revisit it, what your emotions were when you first started with it. So I would say, sort of remembering what those things were, those emotional sort of touch points. And I think, the biggest thing is to kind of think about it from, whose point of view am I telling this story from? And, what structure am I telling it? So, I think, like in the case of, Social Network that I was referring to earlier, the book told it from one character's point of view. The movie told it from another character's point of view. You don't always have to stick with with the character that's in the book. Another character may be a more appropriate character or an easier one to kind of convey the story that's there. And I think the same thing with structure, you know, you don't always have to follow the exact same storytelling structure, but in each case, it's going to affect how the audience understands the story, what they know when. So I think I would just, you know, try and, you know, pay attention to other examples and, you know, how those things changed and what effect that has on you. And there's, you know, there's so many amazing examples out there that it seems like you can really learn a lot from just watching, you know, reading another book and seeing how it was adapted into a movie. What were the choices people made?
Those are great suggestions. I'm ready to make my next feature. So I actually want to ask two questions from our attendees, and then we'll try to wrap it up. We're running out of time, unfortunately. I think I can talk to you both for hours and hours. The first question that one of our attendees is asking, Jonathan Carr, is what is a book that you would like to see adapted which hasn't yet? I like that question.
I'm trying to think. Alyssa, I don't know if you have
Yeah,
it's probably one of the ones you're doing, but I have a couple, but I guess
I have a million. And there's a lot that's coming up soon. That, you know, things that I love that are in various stages of adaptation, like Pachinko, which is a novel from 2 or 3 years ago, that Apple is adapting as a series. But a book that came to mind when Hardy was talking about staying true to the adaptation, a book by Neil Gaiman called The Ocean at the End of the Lane is one of my all-time favorites. I think it's from 2002-ish. It's been optioned various times. It hasn't been made. It's an incredible, sort of sits in the space between children's book and fairy tale and coming of age and adult fantasy. I think one of the reasons this hasn't been adapted is that it's tonally so hard to find that just right exact thing and get it right. And it's one I would love to see done on the big screen, just event theatrical, you know, release. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I'm so sorry that we're out of time, but yes, we will try to get the other answer to them at some point. They are basically asking about the character development and how do you think, you know, it differs from book till it makes to the screen. If either of you could touch upon that briefly, and then we'll wrap it up.
I'm sorry, could you repeat I think I just
character
blanked out.
development, Hardy, how important that is basically while it's making its transition from book to screen, because oftentimes, I think you both have briefly touched upon it in the beginning as well. Like sometimes we, you know, see things differently on screen, whether it was portrayed in a different way on the paper. So how important the character development is?
Well, I think it's, you know, paramount. And I think, you know, one of the main reasons why books are so, you know, such a rich source material to actually get movies made is that the characters are often so rich and fully developed. So I think that really helps in terms of attracting, you know, actors, which is such a key part of it. But I think, you know, in terms of looking for characters that make a good I think characters that seem to, you know, have a clear want or desire or a goal or something that they want, it's oftentimes much easier to sort of make those characters adapt on screen, because, you know, movies tend to have, you know, stories about a character who is trying to achieve some goal, or you know, they're so externally driven, whereas I think, you know, some book material is about a character who is conflicted and kind of can't act, and so all the really interesting stuff is, you know, about why they can't act. So I think, you know, but having said that, there's still plenty of movies that have been made about characters who don't sort of fall into that typical pattern in a way. So, but I think, you know, finding a character that has clear motivations is a really helpful, you know, or has interesting contradictory motivations too. I think, especially in the television world, gives you a lot to play with over time.
Beautiful. Those are magical words and words of wisdom. Thank you so much, Elisa and Hardy, for joining us. We are so grateful to have you for our first ever virtual movie industry conference at BFF 2020. And I hope you can join us for our other panels as well. And we'll be shortly introducing our next panel. So thank you so much for chatting with me. It was a pleasure in this virtual coop.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the Bushwick Film Festival. It's really great.
Thank
y'all were
you.
doing.